Hello viewers, welcome to Newsweek South Asia, where we will provide you fresh insights into South Asia's geopolitical, strategic and security situation. Let's take a look at the headlines first. India pays heartfelt tribute to the victims of the 2001 Parliament attack. Security forces intensify operations in Jammu and Kashmir, neutralizing 5 terrorists in Kulgam. And the Army Public School tragedy continues to haunt Pakistan. On the 23rd anniversary of the 2001 Parliament attack, India remembered the bravery of the security forces who prevented a tragedy that could have shaken the nation. The attack, orchestrated by Pakistan-based terrorist groups Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, resulted in the loss of 9 lives, including police officers and security personnel. Despite ongoing international condemnation, Pakistan's role in sponsoring cross-border terrorism remains undeniable. A report.
On December 13, 2001, the Indian Parliament in New Delhi was brutally attacked by 5 terrorists armed with grenades, guns and explosives. They stormed the complex with intent to assassinate lawmakers and destabilize the nation. However, their plan was foiled when security forces killed all 5 terrorists before they could reach the heart of the Parliament building. Affiliated with Pakistan-based groups Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, these terrorists sought to target India's political leadership and strike fear across the country. The attack resulted in the loss of 9 lives, including 6 Delhi police officers and 2 Parliament security personnel. 18 others were injured in the attack. Fortunately, members of Parliament and ministers escaped unscathed, but the nation's sense of security was shattered. Afzal Guru, a Kashmiri man convicted of assisting the attackers by arranging weapons and shelter, was sentenced to death and executed in February 2013 for his role in this horrific act. On the 23rd anniversary of the attack, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, along with lawmakers from across the political spectrum, gathered to pay tribute to the victims and honor the sacrifices made by those who thwarted the terrorists' plans. The event was a stark reminder of the enduring threat posed by terrorism and the fight against those who sponsor it.
After Pakistan was defeated badly by India in the 1971 war, which led to the creation of a new nation, Bangladesh, Pakistan adopted a policy wherein it would support terrorism in India so that it would weaken India internally. The 2001 Parliament attack is a step in that direction, as Pakistan wanted to inflict maximum casualties on the member of parliaments of India so as to make India more weaker internally.
The 2001 attack on India's parliament was not an isolated incident, but a stark reflection of Pakistan's consistent support for cross-border terrorism. Despite global condemnation, extremist groups based in Pakistan have continued to target India, with the 2001 attack standing as a grim milestone in this ongoing conflict. The fact that groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, responsible for the attack, have repeatedly launched attacks on Indian soil under the patronage of Pakistan's military establishment highlights a deep-rooted policy of fostering terrorism. Even as Pakistan outwardly condemns terrorism, it has failed to take concrete actions against the masterminds and their safe havens within its borders.
It is now amply clear that Pakistan is the global epicenter of terrorism. Hence, internationally, every country should condemn Pakistan's actions in it by its support of terrorism, whether directly or indirectly. And since India has faced the maximum brunt from Pakistan-aided terrorists, it is time that every nation stands up in support of India so that Pakistan is isolated and is forced to stop its support to terrorism.
As the world watches, India's fight against terrorism remains unyielding. Yet the shadow of terrorism continues to loom large, with Pakistan's involvement in these attacks undeniable. With each passing year, the anniversary of the 2001 Parliament attack serves as a reminder. Pakistan's role in supporting terrorism is unlikely to change, and India's resolve to confront this menace is stronger than ever.
In a major security operation in Jammu and Kashmir, 5 terrorists were killed in an encounter with security forces in Kulgam district. This operation, part of a broader effort to dismantle terror networks, was triggered by credible intelligence on terrorist activity in the region. Alongside this success, security forces are intensifying their crackdown on drug trafficking, which funds these terror operations. These combined efforts underscore a renewed commitment to restoring peace and stability in the region. A report.
In a major security breakthrough in Jammu and Kashmir, 5 terrorists were killed in a fierce gunfight with security forces in Kulgam district on December 19. The operation began late the previous night when security forces launched a cordon and search operation in the Kadar area of Behibag based on credible intelligence regarding the presence of suspected terrorists. As the forces closed in, the terrorists opened fire, triggering a prolonged exchange of fire that ultimately led to their elimination.
ये काडर कुलगाम का गांव है। यहाँ पे कल शाम से जो है वो एनकाउंटर जो है वो चल रहा है और इस एनकाउंटर में अभी तक जो है वो 5 जो है वो टेररिस्ट जो है वो मारे गए हैं। ऑपरेशन अभी जारी है, सर्च ऑपरेशन अभी चल रहा है। बाकी डिटेल जो है जब ऑपरेशन कंक्लूड होगा हम आपको बाकी जानकारी दे देंगे। अभी बॉडी जो है वो रिट्रीव हो रही है, उसकी पूरी की पूरी जो है वो आपकी डिटेल जो है वो हम एनकाउंटर के कंक्लूड होने के बाद बता देंगे। आइडेंटिफिकेशन हुई है सर? जहां तक आइडेंटिफिकेशन का सवाल है, मैंने ये आपको बताया कि ऑपरेशन अभी जारी है। ये जो है वो शायद जो ऑपरेशन है वो हिजबुल मुजाहिदीन से ताल्लुक रखते हैं, ये दहशतगर्द।
This successful operation in Kulgam is part of a broader and intensifying effort by security forces to dismantle terror networks and counter Pakistan-backed activities in the region. Alongside the elimination of terrorists, forces are also making headway in the fight against drug trafficking, which is increasingly being used to fund terror activities. In Kupwara, security forces announced the arrest of over 100 individuals involved in drug-related offences this year, underscoring the region's rising threat from both narcotics and terrorism.
इस साल तकरीबन 108 के करीब लोग मुख्तलिफ केसों में गिरफ्तार हुए जो ड्रग्स में इन्वॉल्व थे। इसमें 103 के करीब लोग गिरफ्तार हो चुके हैं और 2-3 अभी वांटेड है हमें। और इस साल हमने अभी तक 14 बंदे पीट एनडीपीएस में डिटेन किए हैं, जिसमें चरस, हेरोइन, बाकी चीज़ें शामिल हैं। कल रात को भी हमने एक अच्छा ऑपरेशन, ज्वाइंट ऑपरेशन आर्मी के साथ किया टंगडार एरिया में, जिसमें हमने 4 पिस्टलें और करीब 4.25 kg ड्रग्स नारकोटिक्स के सीज किए हैं।
As the security forces ramp up operation across Jammu and Kashmir, the growing nexus between Pakistan-based terrorist groups and drug smuggling rings is becoming increasingly apparent. The operations in Kulgam and Kupwara highlight a dual strategy to eliminate terror cells and curb the flow of illicit drugs, both of which contribute to the destabilization of the region. The successful neutralization of terrorists combined with anti-drug operations emphasizes the government's commitment to countering both the terror threat and the illicit trade that funds it. The ongoing security operations signal a renewed determination to bring lasting peace and stability to Jammu and Kashmir, despite the persistent challenges posed by Pak-backed terror activities.
A decade after the Army Public School tragedy, Pakistan is still grappling with the devastating aftermath of terrorism. The failure to decisively address the root causes of extremism has allowed terrorist groups to strengthen, adapt and expand their reach. Despite public outcry and calls for justice, the government's inability to prioritize counter-terrorism has left the country vulnerable. The seeds of violence sown years ago have now grown into formidable threats bearing bitter fruit. Take a look.
The morning of December 16, 2014 remains one of the darkest and most tragic days in Pakistan's history. On that day, 6 gunmen from the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan attacked the Army Public School in Peshawar, mercilessly killing 149 people, including 132 children. This horrifying incident sent shockwaves through the country, leaving families, students and teachers devastated and questioning the leadership at the time. A decade later, justice remains elusive and the scars of that day continue to haunt Pakistan. As Pakistan marks the 10th anniversary of the APS attack, it's clear that the memories of this atrocity are still fresh in the minds of people across the country. Despite the immense public outcry and calls for justice, tangible action against the menace of terrorism remains inadequate. The APS attack shook the world, but the demands for justice and accountability have largely gone unanswered as terrorism continues to cast a long shadow over Pakistan.
The 2014 Army public school attacks in Peshawar remains as one of the most horrific incidents in Pakistan's history, exposing a very grim reality of what extremism brings. And this massacre, I believe, claimed lives of 140 people, mostly children, who have been targeted in this particular attack. And when I look at this issue, I believe that the main reason behind Pakistan's failure to address this root cause of extremism is the issue which lies in the decade-old policy of supporting terrorist groups for geopolitical purposes. And as Dr. Jaishankar had aptly remarked in one of the press conferences, he said that you can't keep snakes in your backyard and expect them to only bite your neighbors. So this policy, I do believe, has led to an environment in Pakistan which is conducive to the growth of such groups.
On December 16, authorities were compelled to shut down all private and public schools in Islamabad and Punjab, taking a precautionary step to avert another tragedy. This drastic measure underscores the ongoing and unresolved nature of Pakistan's battle against terrorism. The government's failure to effectively prioritize and address this issue highlights the grim reality of the country's persistent struggle with extremist violence. The roots of terrorism planted years ago have now grown into formidable threats bearing bitter fruit. Tragically, the state seems more focused on suppressing political opposition than confronting the ever-present dangers of extremism.
While Pakistan, I do believe, has also taken countermeasures and military operations such as Zarb-e-Azab to tackle TTP after there was a sharp rise in their attacks on Pakistan Army. I believe that the selective approach to terrorism and extremism of certain groups, tolerating certain groups, while on the other hand severely undermines this particular efforts. And since the inception, I believe that since Pakistan has leaned heavily on its Islamic identity, and the problem comes when this particular narrative gets intertwined with the national identity. and with the change in the government in Afghanistan as well, with Taliban coming in, I believe that this has also led to an increase in the skirmishes between the Pakistani army and the Afghan Taliban along the Durand line.
With terrorism still a constant threat and justice yet to be served, the road ahead for Pakistan remains shrouded in darkness. Until the root causes of violence are effectively addressed and meaningful action is taken, the country's future remains at risk, and the spectre of another tragedy looms ever closer. Terrorist groups operating within Pakistan have only grown in strength over the years, adapting and expanding their reach. Attacks on both civilians and security forces have become frequent, as these outfits exploit the nation's political instability, weak governance, and the dangerous game of appeasement politics. They thrive in an environment where political and military priorities often conflict and security efforts are fragmented. The lack of coordinated, comprehensive strategies to dismantle these groups has fostered a sense of helplessness among the public.
The people of Pakistan-occupied Gilgit-Baltistan have been protesting against what they see as a series of discriminatory policies that have long burdened the region's businesses and residents. The latest wave of unrest has been driven by mounting economic hardships, with local business owners, particularly those running mills and grinding machines, voicing their concerns over government actions that they claim are stifling their livelihoods and deepening economic inequality. Take a look.
The grievances of people living in Pakistan-occupied Gilgit-Baltistan have been building for years, fueled by what they perceive as policies that consistently favor the elite while leaving ordinary people to struggle. One of the latest issues to spark public outcry is the government's push to force mill and grinding machine owners to register with authorities. Protesters argue that this registration is not a genuine effort to regulate the businesses, but rather a covert scheme to impose hefty taxes disguised as registration and renewal fees. For many small business owners, particularly in rural areas, these added costs are simply too much to bear. They argue that such measures only serve to stifle local industry and create more financial obstacles, worsening the already difficult economic situation.
11 मशीन वालों को उन्होंने एक नोटिस भेजा था कि भाई 9 दिसंबर तक कोई अगर अपने 11 मशीन का रजिस्ट्रेशन नहीं कराएगा तो हम 9 दिसंबर के बाद उसको सील करेंगे। जब अवामी एक्शन कमेटी ने इस पर रद्द अमल शुरू किया तो उन्होंने इसको अब तक रोका गया है, लेकिन दरमियान में जब थोड़ी सी खामोशी होती है तो वो फिर उभर आते हैं और इनको नोटिसें देते हैं कि आप रजिस्ट्रेशन कराओ और सालाना 15,000 रुपये आप रिन्यूअल फीस दे दो।
The issues in POGB go far beyond just taxes. The local community has been outspoken about their long-standing grievances with the government's treatment of their region. One of the major sources of frustration is the government's recent hike in commercial electricity tariffs. Protesters claim that this increase in electricity prices is yet another attempt to exploit the local population. Many residents argue that the electricity they rely on is generated within POGB, yet they are forced to pay exorbitant rates compared to other regions. They believe that this price hike unfairly targets vulnerable communities and adds to the financial strain of already struggling families and businesses. Not only is electricity expensive, but it is also frequently unavailable for hours at a time, causing significant inconvenience and disruption to daily life.
ये हाइड्रो एनर्जी का कहा जाता है, गिलगित बल्तिस्तान बेस कैम्प है। लेकिन यहाँ हाइड्रो एनर्जी के हवाले से जो खेल खेला जा रहा है, खिलवाड़, अब तक जो हमारे जो तजुर्बात हुए हैं, जो तलख हालात से हम गुज़रे हैं, वो ये हैं कि यहाँ पर इलाके को, आवाम को फैसिलिटेट करने के लिए गवर्नमेंट के पास कोई ऐसा कोई मेकनिज़म नहीं है। ये चंद ठेकेदार और अफसरान की जो है ना ब्यूरोक्रेसी की बंदर बांट के लिए यहाँ पर प्रोजेक्ट लगाए जाते हैं और चंद महीने के बाद वाइंड अप करके जो है ना पैसे खा जाते हैं, जिसकी वजह से यहाँ मैं तो कहूँगा 24 घंटे में घरेलू जो सारिफिन हैं उनके लिए तकरीबन 1 घंटे भी बिजली मुयस्सर नहीं है। आज मैं खुद हूँ अपना मोबाइल ला के यहाँ किसी दुकानदार के पास लेके आए हैं कि इसको चार्ज करें, इस नौबत पे हैं।
Another issue fueling the protests is the controversial re-implementation of the Land Reforms and Finance Act. Locals in POGB see this act as another tool to benefit powerful elites at their expense. For them, the law is nothing more than a continuation of discriminatory policies that favor the rich and well-connected while leaving the region's most vulnerable residents even more marginalized. Critics of the act argue that it does not account for the needs of smaller communities which have been historically neglected by government policies. They fear that this new legislation will only serve to widen the gap between the wealthy and the poor, further entrenching the socio-economic disparities that have plagued the region for years.
And with that, we come to the end of this edition of Newsweek South Asia. We will be back next week with more news, views and analysis from the subcontinent. Meanwhile, do keep writing to us at nwsa@anin.com. This is Akansha Paribu signing off on behalf of the entire team of Newsweek South Asia. Goodbye and take care.